Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Your Health in Your Hands. I'm Dr. David Ajibade with the Brain and Body Foundation. I'm just trying to adjust my head here. um, to all intents and purposes, the pandemic, COVID-19, is over in most parts of the world. Yes, there's still a lot of masking. Yes, you still vaccine. You need to be vaccinated and boosted, especially if you are in a very high risk category. But for most businesses and most people, you don't have to wear a mask in most places. I don't know what it is in other parts of the world. Like our guest is from New Zealand. They probably have a lot of masking going on. But where the airlines are concerned in the US, you still have to wear a mask, get on a plane, you still have to wear a mask all over the airport. But again, for most people, you don't have to wear masks. And I've driven across the US in the last few months. I've driven back and forth across the US. And I've visited maybe half the states in the United States. And yes, there are varying degrees of people concerned about COVID-19. But again, for the most part, we're not as concerned about it as we used to be, like, let's say, a year ago. That does not mean, though, that the effects are not going to be with us for quite a while. And by the effects, obviously, I'm talking about some of not just the direct effects of COVID-19. Some of us have had COVID-19 and we've had what is known as long haul COVID, meaning that after 2-3 months, you're still suffering the effects, maybe chest pains, cough, neurological conditions, and of course, mental health issues. But even those who were not affected directly by the virus itself, there are many who have, because of the lockdowns, because of the masking, because of the school closures, there's a lot of mental health issues going on beneath the surface. And I think in the years to come, we're just going to see how damaging this whole pandemic was. We already know financially it has cost a lot of money to businesses, governments, and people. But that to me is just the tip of the iceberg because when it comes to mental health issues, that's going to be a much greater problem. Because as you know, and as we've talked about on these talks, that the mental health issues don't just affect your mind and your emotions, they affect the physical body. They can predispose you to all kinds of problems, from strokes to diabetes to hypertension to other kinds of cardiovascular disease. So this is not something to be sneezed about. And that's why I'm so glad that we have on our show today a very special guest. We have known her, got to know her. I watched her on a talk about, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I was so impressed with what she was talking about with regards to mental health and nutrition that I had to reach out to her, and graciously she agreed. And so I'm going to be introducing her in a few minutes. But first, we need to take a break. And during this short break, please be sure to reach out to your friends and family, because we're going to be talking about a topic that is really, really, really important. So we'll take a quick break and we will be right back. See you soon. All right, welcome back. Today on the show we have, and I'm going to bring out her bio. Julia Rockledge, PhD, is a professor of psychology and is a clinical psychologist in the School of Psychology, Speech and Hearing at the University of Canterbury. She's also the director of mental health and nutritional research and the Nutritional Research Lab. She is theme leader in the Child Wellbeing Institute and co-author of The Better Brain. She completed her PhD at the University of Calgary in clinical psychology. And in the year 2000, she immigrated to New Zealand. Her interest in nutrition and mental illness grew out of research showing poor outcomes for individuals with significant psychiatric illness, despite receiving standard conventional treatments. For over a decade, her lab has been running clinical trials investigating the role of broad-spectrum micronutrients in the treatment of mental illness, including ADHD, mood disorders, anxiety, and stress. Julie has over 140 peer-reviewed publications, including in the Lancet Psychiatry, JAMA, that's the Journal of American Medical Association, and the British Journal of Psychiatry, and is currently on the executive committee for the International Society of Nutritional Psychiatry Research. And she has a lot more in her bio, but I'm not going to read all that out. So, Julia, Dr. Rutledge, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, David, and it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you for making this possible. I wasn't sure you'll find the time to do this, but I'm so glad you agreed to do this. So let's get into this. Mental health. What do you, in your opinion, what do you think has been the effect? Well, first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about your research and your background, but then come around to saying, what do you think has been the effect of this pandemic, what you're seeing over there, and maybe we can talk about how you are working with governments and working with the organizations to mitigate this problem of mental health.
Sure. I mean, mental health issues are new to society, as we well know. I mean, but we certainly have observed a growing number of people who are struggling with mental health issues. Whether or not that's societal, that's more acceptance of mental health issues. People are more likely to reach out at the moment. It's unclear, but however we look at it, we know that there's between 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 who are now seem to be struggling with mental health issues. In any one given year, it's one half of us will have a mental health issue over our lifetime. So it's we do know it's a serious problem, and the pandemic has certainly not helped. As you alluded to, there's the issues of the lockdown, which can impact people in different ways. For some people, to be honest, it was probably a great time, a holiday. For those who may have been able to work at home, there wasn't a huge disruption in terms of their lives. They didn't have young children to try to parent and work at the same time. Then it could have been a very different experience, depending on your circumstances. But for people who are probably from more of a lower socioeconomic status families, those who had to work, go out there because they were essential workers, then their experience is going to be very different. So it's kind of hard to say there's going to be this, sort of quantify it for each individual, because we know the circumstances were very different. But I was just reading today just about some of the complex issues that we are going to face, or even things like people who didn't have an opportunity to see, their loved ones when they were dying because of all of the COVID restrictions. And I'm sure a lot of that happened in the US. It was a massive, massive issue here. Personally, I was also affected. My father died last year, and I couldn't get over in time because of the COVID restrictions. I did go I did attend his funeral in the UK, but it was incredibly stressful to not be able to get there in time. So it means that, but to be honest, I was lucky to be able to get over it all. Our borders have been shut in New Zealand for 2 years. They're just about to open and we had a very strict quarantine procedure to come into the country if you were a New Zealander, and which meant you had to spend 2 weeks in isolation in a hotel. And those spots were, there weren't a lot of them. And so it was, to get a spot in such a short amount of time, I was very, very fortunate. So, but one thing that I was allowed to experience, and I know a lot of people haven't experienced, is that grief process. And so to be surrounded, at least with your family members, to go through those rituals that are so important to us is part of that process of grieving for someone who is really close to us and who means a lot to us. So many people have not had that opportunity, and we know that is going to lead to potentially more ongoing psychological issues that they may not necessarily have faced had they been able to attend the funeral, be there when someone was in their last days or of life. Right. I'm just pointing out one of the many repercussions of all of the restrictions that we've all gone through. Right. The masking, what's the masking done to our kids, and the effect on 5-year-olds who are going to school and they couldn't go to school and they haven't been able to perhaps even learn to read the way you would normally traditionally have learned to read. We depend so much on the facial expressions and the mouth moving in order to gain those skills really early on, what effect is that going to have? And we're only going to really get a sense of the repercussions over time. So I just wanted to, I mean, those are just a few examples. I know there's a lot of other ways of thinking about it. Anxiety for some people around getting a sickness and how are kids interpreting that there's this virus that can kill people that's out there. And so what impact is that going to have in terms of the increase in anxiety disorders, mood disorders over time? So we know that it's going to be an impact.
Sorry, I think that's already showing, isn't it? I mean, from recent studies, suicide rates have gone through the roof, depression, anxiety, especially among the I don't know which categories hit the most, but we're hearing a lot about the teenage girls, especially with depression and anxiety. It's hitting them. I will not say it's not just them that is. So we've got to look for alternatives that are practical. And I always think in terms of remote areas. What does Hajia Yasikira, for instance, who is in a village, she's illiterate. She doesn't know what to do. Maybe she thinks there's an evil spirit coming after her and all that. How can we help such people who are dealing, either they themselves or their children are dealing with mental health conditions? There's got to be a way. It shouldn't just be the privilege of those living in urban areas or in the world to have access, at least to get some degree of relief. And I always think in terms of 25%. If we can just get this person 25% better, that would be a win for us.
Sure. So what can they do? Right.
So we're going to come back after the break. So folks, just don't go away. We're getting into the meat of this matter. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are here with Dr. Julia Routledge, who is a clinical professor based in New Zealand. And we're talking about the mental health challenges that are probably going to get a lot worse in the next months to years. And so without further ado, we're going to get back into this. So Julia, let's talk about this. Obviously, most countries don't have the resources, whether it's expertise or establishments or equipment to treat mental health conditions. In fact, in Nigeria, for instance, we have one psychiatrist to 1 million people. One psychiatrist to 1 million people. And I think it's worse in other countries as well. So that's having more staff is probably not the solution.
No, it isn't.
So and we were talking during the break about some of the supplements and nutrients that can help the brain. So let's hear your philosophy and your approach to doing this so we can see how we can apply that in countries like ours.
Sure. So the research that I've been doing, David, is using a broad spectrum micronutrient approach in a pill form. And I started this almost 15 years ago, just being curious about hearing about families who were treating themselves with nutrients in these pill capacities, hearing about recovery with very serious psychiatric problems like bipolar, like psychosis, like depression, and thinking this didn't really fit with my worldview of how I had been trained, that nutrition was really not relevant to brain health. But curious about it, to hear these stories, and also to recognizing that what we were doing wasn't adequately helping enough people. So it seemed like a win-win situation. We either learned that supplements don't work, and that's useful to know, or we learn that supplements can be helpful, and that you'd think that everybody should be interested in that. So I started doing clinical trials back in 2007, 2008, giving people these broad spectrum micronutrients, nothing special. It's not magical. Not everyone necessarily gets better from this approach, but the point being is that we're not singling out any nutrient as being special. And the reason for that is that when we understand how the brain uses nutrients, you realize that they don't just use one nutrient, that the pathways require lots of cofactors. And cofactors are minerals and vitamins, and they assist and support the enzymes in converting, tryptophan to serotonin, for example. So there's just no one special thing. There are some exceptions, and I know that there are some diseases that have been completely eradicated with just one nutrient. Scurvy would be an example of that. But in the mental health world, that is rare to find that there was just one deficiency that was present, because we typically will see multiple different types of deficiencies. And so So that's what I started to do, was do clinical trials, and we published benefits of nutrients over placebo in reducing symptoms associated with severe psychiatric illnesses. In my case, we did several studies looking at attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but we've since gone on to do other studies looking at symptoms associated with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder following earthquakes and floods, and a shooting that happened in a mosque here in March 2019. Yeah. So we've learned a lot about the role that supplementation can have in I think to be honest, I think one of the things that it does is make people more resilient. It makes them more resilient to deal with the stressors of life. And I think that we can all appreciate that during the pandemic, we've been faced with a lot more stressors, and we've been we've been challenged a lot more physically and mentally to have to try to figure out how to overcome that. And so one thought I've had is that and this is why I think we can't just understand the supplement research without thinking about the food environment, because that's so important to think about it in that context, is that I started to wonder, well, hold on, we're giving people these nutrients. They're available in food. Why is it that people aren't getting these nutrients adequately out of their food? Why is it we have to supplement them or give them these extra, nutrients in order for them to get to a place of better well-being? And so I started to do lots of reading, and this is part of the Better Brain. I co-authored with my PhD supervisor, Bonnie Kaplan, and we uncovered that actually a lot of people, one of the reasons why we might need to supplement is that people's diet has really been eroded over a very short period of time. So, US data is that at least half of the calories come from ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are foods that are high potentially in, they might be okay and adequate in proteins, carbs, and fats. Maybe they'll have a lot of sugar, they'll have some other things added, but they've been stripped, many of them being stripped of micronutrients, these vitamins and minerals that are so important for brain health. So we think we're feeding ourselves. We think that we're giving ourselves adequate amount of calories and energy, but what's missing in that ultra-processed Western style diet are these micronutrients. These vitamins and minerals have become eroded and depleted. So that's why I like to think about my research in the context of the food environment, because that might be part of the success, is that we have been essentially supplementing a really, a diet that has significantly been eroded over the last 100 years.
So the advantage we have, if I may jump in here, the advantage Nigerians would have is that thankfully we've not been exposed to as much processed food as probably the US. I mean, that is changing. But on the other hand, we still eat a lot of natural foods that haven't been processed, like I said. But we cook out of our veggies a lot.
Yeah.
We eat a lot of starchy foods, which of course raises the level of sugar in the body, and of course the insulin raises the level of, which has its own problems. So I'm almost thinking it's still the same final common pathway, in that we're still not getting as much nutrients as we probably should have because of all the cooking and all that, and the fact that we have a very limited range of food. I mean, we just eat a lot of starchy foods, rice, and then and all that.
Exactly. And some things that were discovered from what would be seen as quite a mono kind of diet would be something like a diet that consists mostly of rice. And that's when there was a discovery that was made around that being deficient in niacin, which is one of the B vitamins. And so one of the consequences of a niacin deficient diet is that you get pellagra, which is where you get scaly, dermatitis and dementia and psychosis. So you get a mix of physical and mental health issues. And so supplementing with niacin actually cured that. But what it also should reveal to people is that your diet really shouldn't consist of just one thing, that
Right.
you need the full array of all of the foods that nature offers us to get the full array of nutrients. So we do need to be eating plentiful of a variety of different types of foods, I think is one of the things that comes out of this kind of research. So, and cooking your vegetables and fruits, I mean, well, I don't know, they probably don't cook the fruits, but they cook the vegetables. Would be, we were talking about this earlier, is just around, was that a smart thing for people to do, potentially because it might kill some pathogens that are going to, kill you. So if you eat them raw, maybe they might have been a problem. But I suppose now that we understand a lot more about pathogens, the need to even wash your foods, but then washing your foods in good water, not dirty water, those challenges that you would have in Nigeria that we don't experience in New Zealand. If those issues could be dealt with, could you then be more likely to tolerate eating more of the raw vegetables, which may be more nutrient rich, because sometimes cooking can reduce the nutrient value of some foods, not all foods, but certainly some foods. So
absolutely. So that's definitely something we will need to explore through education, and has to be consistent, constant pounding of people, because in many cultures they just think that the only people, I mean, the only animals that eat raw veggies, that eat raw spinach and other things. I've actually heard somebody say this, that their grandmother said that it's only goats and sheep that eat raw veggies. So we have a long way to go, and unfortunately, that our time for this episode is over. So we're going to have to take it to leave it off here, and hopefully, if we can convince Dr. Rockledge to be back, we'll continue from there. Especially because I wanted to hear a lot about specific research in some of these conditions that she mentioned earlier. So thank you, Dr. Rockledge, for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And folks, remember that we are working with sickle cell disease in Nigeria. We're actually underway in Lagos. So if you want to hear more about it, please go to our website, brainandbodyfoundation.org. And of course, if you have a kid in the Abuja area or around the country, you can come on Fridays to our free clinics where we address brain disorders, including cerebral palsy and sickle cell disease is not a brain disorder, but seizure disorders and so on and so forth. So just reach out to us again at Brain and Body Foundation. Same thing on our social media platforms. You see us there. So till then, we'll see you next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong. Take care. God bless. Bye.